What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Steelers Breakdown Podcast here. It's Preview Friday, and I got a nice guest with me, Alex Katzen from Chargers Wire, one of the best in the business, in my opinion. Alex, how you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Thanks for having me. Excited to preview this game.
Yeah, man, it should be a fun matchup. Different Chargers team, huh, from the past. It's all Jim Harbaugh ball.
Very
If you watch
different.
Michigan, you know what it is. And there's enough Michigan people in the Steelers fan base, but run heavy approach to this team, huh?
Yeah, J.K. Dobbins leads the league in rushing yards through 2 weeks here. They've certainly run the ball more than they've thrown it. Justin Herbert hasn't thrown up for over 150 yards yet. Hasn't really had to because they've been able to rip off these big runs with Dobbins. But they've also been super efficient on the ground. Dobbins leads the league with only like 27 carries, which is like half as many as the second place rusher right now. So it's going to be definitely a lot of ground game attack on Sunday.
It feels interesting because Greg Roman obviously is so familiar to the Steelers. So is J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Bradley Bozeman, the big fullback. It's like Ravens West to a degree. If you are Pittsburgh, you know what it is. But it was interesting. I was looking at the film from the Panthers game. 27 zone runs, only 10 gap runs in that game. It looked like for the Chargers. So they're a pretty multiple scheme when they were a big time gap scheme, obviously with Lamar and the Chargers. But I think the big thing that's looming over this offense, Alex, is Justin Herbert. Of course, we know it's a high ankle sprain now. He's questionable, didn't practice on Friday. I fully expected him going up to the week to play. I kind of still expect him to play. But I mean, you don't practice on Friday. That obviously puts doubt into it. It sounds like Jim Harbaugh opened up the door to Heineke starting as well. I think that's why I would start over Easton Stick. But how, if Herbert does play, how does the lack of mobility affect this offense? And what would you do a quarterback if he can't go?
Yeah, I think it's going to affect it a lot. I mean, if Herbert plays, which it sounds like he's going to try to, despite not practicing all week, he's listed as questionable. He said today that the pain isn't great, but they're going to test it out on Sunday. But if he can't kind of escape the pocket and manage it the way that we've seen him do so far, I think that Herbert is one of the best pocket managers in the league right now. If he doesn't have the mobility to be able to do that, that is going to present a lot of problems for this Chargers offense because the interior is the weak part of this offensive line. With Cameron Hayward on the other side, who had 6 pressures against Denver, like that's not going to be a winning recipe for the Chargers if Herbert can't extend plays and kind of get out of the pocket, step up in the pocket, do all that stuff. It's going to be a lot more quick game. If he doesn't play, I would start Heineke. I think that the concern as to why it hasn't been like established that Heineke would be the guy is that he's only been on the Chargers for 2 or 3 weeks at this point. So he might not necessarily know the full offense, doesn't necessarily have the full playbook at his disposal. But I mean, they traded for him for a reason, which is that you saw Easton Stick play in the preseason. He didn't look very good. The options behind Easton Stick looked even worse in the preseason. And so you went out and traded for this guy basically for this exact reason. I don't really see any reason why he wouldn't start on Sunday if Herbert is out, other than just, he's not ready yet. He doesn't have, full control over the offense yet.
Yeah, I think that's what I would do. He can escape the pocket as a veteran. But you mentioned it. The Steelers' D line obviously has been maybe the best defensive line for 2 weeks in football. They don't blitz much. I think they blitz is like the sixth lowest rate in the NFL. They rush four, but I think they have the highest pressure rate in the NFL according to Pro Football Focus, just with four. Now I'm interested to see Joe Alt versus T.J. Watt, Alex Highsmith versus Rashawn Slater, and Nick Herbig to get in on there too. I think those are heavyweight matchups. But you mentioned the interior. What do you feel about this Chargers O line against the Steelers D line? Because you look at Ogunjobi, Benton, Hayward against Bozeman, Johnson, and Pipkins. That feels like a big time matchup. But how do you feel about this O line matchup against the Steelers D line in the pass pro and in the run game?
Yeah, I think in pass pro, I'm going to be interested to see. I don't know how much Pittsburgh typically stunts their D line, but in week one against the Raiders, Las Vegas stunted Max Crosby a lot in order to get him on matchups on the interior, mostly because when he was on the outside, he was getting shut down by Joe Alt. Alt was the first one to completely shut him out of a pressure in almost 18 months in that week one game. But all of Crosby's pressure came from the interior on those stunts. So I'm interested to see if the Steelers kind of see that, or if they, kind of implement into the game plan, like getting Watt and Highsmith and Herbig kind of on some of those looping plays to get against this interior a little bit more. Bozeman has been one of the worst pass blocking centers in football so far through 2 weeks. I don't know exactly what has gone into that. I think that it might just be an adjustment to the new team. But he should be familiar with the scheme. He played in Baltimore before. So I think it's just been a slow start to the season for him. Zion Johnson has had a really hard time picking up stunts on that left side. And so you saw like in week one, a lot of those pressures that Crosby had were like on a stunt between him and Christian Wilkins on that left side, where Slater picks it up correctly and then Johnson just doesn't quite read it. Um, in the run game, I think it's going to be interesting. This is a really strong Steelers run defense. They haven't allowed a 100-yard rusher yet. Completely shut down the Broncos on last week. But this is a Chargers offensive line that has run blocked very well. I think that Alt has run blocked very well. Was a little bit shakier in week one, but I thought he had a really good game against the Panthers as a run blocker. Pipkins has been a really good run blocker from the interior after playing right tackle last season. But it's a strong Steelers D line with Ogunjobi and Benton and Hayward in there on in the middle. I think you're going to see a lot more sort of like those zone runs that they ran against the Panthers. I think you're going to see a lot more of that to kind of get Dobbins a little bit more on the edge a little bit and see if maybe they can test the slot or the corners and linebackers a little bit more rather than trying to run that thing up the middle.
Yeah, I think that's going to be interesting. I think they're going to bring out the Bronco package, just a three outside linebacker package the Steelers use to get their outside backers over the interior. We've seen Herbig do that a lot, so we'll be interested to see that. I want to flip sides now to the defensive side. The Chargers D line has been interesting. Obviously, Mack and Bosa have done their thing. They're bottom five in pressure rate, but mostly I think that's because Minshew and Young have been getting the ball out very quickly. And then you kind of look at the interior. You thought this might be a weakness. Do you think that they've been tested on the interior yet? It feels like Tear Tart's played really well for them. They've gotten some really good contributions from the D tackle, but do you think they have been tested yet? And do you think the Steelers matchup on the interior there, you're going to have Zach Frazier, James Daniels, Spencer Anderson is going to play with Isaac Seumalo out. But how do you think that interior works, and how do you think the edges are going to work with Steelers having so much offensive tackle uncertainty? Troy Fautano being questioned.
Yeah, I think that the Chargers interior has been able to kind of work one-on-one a lot more through the first 2 weeks of the season because teams are putting so much emphasis on limiting Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. When you have both of those guys healthy, which the Chargers haven't for a large portion of the time that they've both been on the team together, you have to account for both of those guys, and you can't keep a tight end in on both sides in pass pro most of the time. And so you kind of have to slide protections over to stop one of those guys. Maybe you get a chip on the other one, but that's left the interior with a lot of one-on-one matchups. I think pass rush wise, Morgan Fox has kind of gotten off to a slow start to the season on the interior. I would like to see them kind of bring out their three edge rusher package a little bit more with Tuli Tuipulotu out there. Had a really strong rookie season last year. Has been kind of up and down so far through 2 weeks. I think hasn't really gotten too many opportunities so far. But if they bring out that package, then I think you have one of those guys against the interior of the Steelers offensive line, like you said, with Anderson coming in with Samalo out. And then on the interior, like run defense wise, Puna Ford has been a revelation so far through 2 weeks. I thought he had a really strong game in week one against Raider center Andre James, who got an extension. I think it was either this offseason or last offseason. Like he's a good player. And so I think in that sense, they have been tested in the run game in that sense. Tier Tart has been good in sort of limited action. I think they're going to ramp him up to kind of play more full time as the season keeps going here. I think that Tart and Ford are going to be the main guys on the interior, especially in run packages. And like I think according to Pro Football Focus, Daniels has given up 5 pressures so far, this season. I think that there's an opportunity there for a little bit more pass rush on the interior. That's not going to come from Ford necessarily, but I think like you get guys like Otito Ogbonnia in there. Scott Matlock could potentially impact the game in that way. Like there's some room for the Chargers to get pressure here on Justin Fields.
Yeah, I think there is. Fields has the lowest pressure to sack ratio of his career right now, but still takes some bad sacks. Daniels had a really rough game against Zach Allen last week, but we'll see kind of where that goes. Zach Frazier has just been awesome for them at center, so we will
Oh,
see
he's been
how that
incredible.
goes. Right, man. Who knew, right? But what happens at tackles? Broderick Jones going to get out there. He's had a really tough start to the year. And then Dan Moore Jr. has had a really solid start to the year. So we'll see. Darnell Washington factors into this as basically a sixth offensive lineman, too.
Yeah, yeah.
This is all going to kind of come together. I want to talk about the rest of this group because this has been an interesting rest of the group. I like the front. Dan Henley and Denzel Perryman have played really well. No Junior Colson, but Henley and Perryman have been the two main guys, anyways. Doesn't matter if Alohi Gilman plays. I think Elijah Molden's had a really nice start to the year. Derwin James is Derwin James. I think the concern for me, at least, just looking at this, would be the corners. I like Asante Samuel Jr. I like Christian Fulton coming out of LSU, but he had tough time in Tennessee. Jasir Taylor's a solid player, but there is one man I think that could break this game open, and that is one George Pickens, who has had just a great start to the year. How have these corners been tested yet? Doesn't feel like they've been tested down the field, and you know that the Steelers are going to try and get George Pickens involved down the field. So, is that a matchup that scares you potentially? Even if the Steelers' run game isn't going super well, could they break it open with George Pickens?
Yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier when you were talking about the pressure ratio that the Chargers have put together through two games. Gardner Minshew and Bryce Young have been getting the ball out really quickly in those two games against the Chargers. And so I don't think you've really seen these corners get tested downfield too much. Obviously the Raiders have Devontae Adams, who had a few catches, but was mostly limited in that week one game. But not a lot of downfield action for him in that game. Against the Panthers, there's virtually no downfield throws on that tape. And so I do agree that like I think if you get Pickens down the field a little bit more, I think that is a potential weakness there. Christian Fulton, I think, has played very solid through 2 weeks, but also hasn't really been tested because of this short time to throw for these other two quarterbacks. And then Asante Samuel, I think, has played up and down. He's still a little bit rough as a tackler. I think if like even if you want to get the ball to Pickens like in the short area and just have him break a tackle against Asante Samuel, I think that that's an opportunity to kind of generate some yards for the Steelers as well. Um, but yeah, I think that like Pickens down the field is definitely my main concern in this game. I think I wrote for Chargers Wire earlier this week that if you can limit George Pickens down the field, Justin Fields doesn't really like to throw it over the middle, even though Pat Freiermuth is the second most targeted receiver on this team. Like, if you can limit Pickens down the field, then you can really hamstring the Steelers' offense and really kind of box them in a little bit. But it's just a matter of whether or not they can do that. And you're right. Like, they haven't really been tested in that area. And so I'm not really sure if they're going to be able to or not.
It's interesting. Six passes past the line of scrimmage between the numbers for Justin Fields this year. That's crazy. That's the lowest amount in the
Yeah.
NFL. But Pat Freiermuth theoretically could also get involved in this game. This might be a game where they try and get Pat Freiermuth involved. Justin Fields has missed him a few times, so that rapport hasn't been there. I talked about that earlier this week. I would like to see that get stronger this week. Kind of my last thing for you is, Roman Wilson is going to play this week. This is the first week for the Steelers having Roman Wilson, which is going to be interesting. So he could open up that middle of the field a little bit and be the secondary receiver. But overall, when you look at these two teams, what's kind of your feel? What's your prediction? I know it's a tough game to predict, not knowing what Justin Herbert's status and Troy Fautano's status, but how do you kind of see this one playing out?
Yeah, I think that, as the general sort of media has gotten into predicting this game and everything, I think we've maybe gotten a little bit too far ahead of ourselves with like the defense first like run game battle that it's going to be, like some of NFL.com's predictions are like a 9-8 game and stuff like that. Like I think it's going to be a little bit higher scoring than that. I think if like again, like you mentioned, like Herbert playing is going to be kind of the fulcrum of this game, right? Because I think if Herbert plays, that just opens up so much more for this Chargers offense, even though it has been a run first attack so far this season. Ultimately, I do think that the Chargers have a little bit of an advantage just because I think that they have scored more than one touchdown this season. And so, it's been a very strong Chargers defense too. I think that, they have not allowed more than 10 points in a game this season. They allowed 10 to the Raiders and then 3 to the Panthers. Justin Herbert is still undefeated when his defense allows less than 20 points in an NFL game. And so if he plays, I don't know that the Steelers can get to 20. Obviously, you talk about like Roman Wilson playing, that might open up the offense a little bit. And so, maybe there's some opportunity there. But we haven't seen the Steelers get to 20 points yet this season. And I don't know that they have like a really strong path to get there on Sunday. But if Herbert doesn't play, then I think this game blows wide open a little bit more. And I think you do probably see a lower scoring game, probably closer to like a 13-10, 17-13 sort of game. Um, but yeah, I think if Herbert plays, I think the Chargers have an advantage. And if he doesn't, then I think it's a pretty even game. And that's just how it goes in the NFL. Your franchise quarterback is the difference.
Right, I agree. In terms of that, I think the Steelers will have certain advantages if they can tee off on obvious passing downs, whether that's Herbert or Heineke or Stick, whoever. I think they'll have a chance to make some plays. And the Steelers, if they can clean up the penalties, I mean, they should have scored, 24, 27 points last week, but everything just got called back from penalties. I think they have lost the most EPA per play in the NFL this year to penalties. So that is a significant amount. They can just play clean football. They might have more of an opportunity, but this is the toughest defense they faced all year as well. Thanks for having me on, Alex. Thanks for having Alex. Thanks for coming on. My goodness. I don't know. Tell them
This
where
is
they
my
can
show
find
now.
stuff, read you, follow you, all that, man.
Yeah, I'm over at Chargers Wire. I also cover Washington college football over at Huskies Wire. Both of those are for USA Today. Best way to find me, honestly, I'm in a million different places. Just had an article go up on SB Nation on Thursday. But I'm all over the place. Best way to just find me is just go on Twitter, type in Alex Katson, Katson, and you'll find me there. And yeah, I'm all over the place. I'm out with Nick out on the circuit once All-Star games get going in the combine. We're our own little travel party here, so glad to reconnect here and preview this one.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Folks, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. If you're watching this, if you are listening to this on a podcasting platform, make sure to leave a review. Make sure to go follow Alex. He does great stuff, especially when NFL draft time comes around. Spreadsheets, everything that you could ever need. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll be back on Sunday.